The following episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.
Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. During the Democratic debate last night, former Vice President Joe Biden falsely claimed he had never called for cuts to Social Security. Biden made the claim when he was asked by his opponent for the Democratic presidential nomination, Senator Bernie Sanders, whether he had ever called for such cuts. Were you on the floor of the Senate time and time again, for whatever reason, talking about the need to cut Social Security and Medicare and veterans programs? Sanders asked Biden. No, Biden replied. I did not talk about the need to cut any of those programs. All that I would say to the American people, Bernie said, is go to YouTube. It's all over the place. Joe said it many, many times. You can defend it or change your mind on it, but you can't deny the reality. Biden went on to complain about an ad from Bernie Sanders' campaign that was attacking him on his willingness to cut Social Security. Sanders' ad and other attacks from his campaign have focused on comments Biden made during his lengthy political career. Biden, who became a senator in 1973, floated raising the Social Security retirement age in 1983. A year later, in 1984, Biden supported plans to freeze federal spending, including Social Security, as part of an effort to reduce the national debt. And in the 1990s, Biden supported efforts to balance the budget that would have included cuts to Social Security. As a member of the House of Representatives in the 1990s, Sanders opposed that legislation. So here's the underlying problem. Dementia aside, why has Joe always been opposed to programs that help the American working class as opposed to helping big banks and huge corporations? For a long time now, Stephanie Kelton and the MMT crew, the Modern Monetary Theory crew, have shown us that we don't have to raise taxes to fund war. We don't have to raise taxes to fund anything. And this next clip will illustrate that.
Here it is. The Fed injects $1.5 trillion to prop up crashing markets. $1.5 trillion. Wouldn't it be amazing if our government could pump in $1.5 trillion to prop up dying people on the streets?
It would.
Wouldn't that be something? Hey, we have people dying on the streets all over. Hey, we have 40,000 people a year die from lack of health care. Maybe we pump that into them? No. Because this is the 1% you can't F with their economy. We showed you how on CNBC they always put economics over human health or human life. We showed you that Rick Santorelli wanted to everybody get the virus, kill a bunch of people so the markets don't get hurt. So that's what they are. So there it is, 1.5 trillion like that. And where does that money come from? So is that tax money? Are they going to take the taxes that we pay? Where does it come from?
Is that tax money that the Fed is spending?
It's not tax money. We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
What? Is that tax money that the Fed is spending?
It's not tax money. We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
That sounds eerily familiar to something I was told about by Stephanie Kelton on this show called Modern Monetary Theory, meaning that the money that the government spends has no relation to the amount of money that it taxes the people. None. And he just told you that. No, we just move a decimal point, or we just send them an email with some money. We just do it.
So the whole point of austerity, the whole point of saying how you're going to pay for that is to keep the American people disconnected from their productivity. I've said often on this show, the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the people are 400% more productive now than they were in 1950. Because of technology mostly, we are 400% more productive now than we were in 1950. But our wages have been uncoupled from that productivity. So where does that productivity go? It goes into the pockets of the people for whom Joe Biden works. Joe keeps harping on how you're going to pay for that because that's what his masters want him to say. It's easy to pay for war. It's easy to bail out the big banks. It doesn't seem to be so easy to help the American people. That's why FDR was elected to 4 terms. He actually gave a shit about the U.S. working class, and then his actions showed that. This austerity runs very deep in Joe Biden. He wants penny pinching when it comes to the American people, but not when it comes to the big banks. Listen to his answer here about Medicare for All and how he would veto it if it came across his desk as President of the United States.
My opposition relates to whether or not, A, it's doable, 2, what the cost is, and what the consequences for the rest of the budget are. How are you going to find $35 trillion over the next 10 years without having profound impacts on everything from taxes for middle class and working class people, as well as the impact on the rest of the budget?
So he's lying through his teeth. If you can just spend into existence $1.5 trillion overnight, bam, to help the big bankers, you could do it. Easily, you could do it. And it doesn't have any effect on taxes. That's the big lie. You don't have to raise taxes to fund war. You don't have to raise taxes to bail out the banks. You just snap your fingers and the spreadsheet magically changes. And Joe has to know this. He's been around a long, long time. What Scranton Joe is saying here is, I don't give an actual shit about regular working class people. Here's a clip from Brenda Bernstein, to which I'll link, that gives you all the videos in one place that Bernie is referring to.
Joe Biden is coming back as a solo act.
I'm ready to go.
With his long record facing a new look under the spotlight of the 2020 campaign.
Gentlemen and ladies of the Senate.
One chapter receiving fresh scrutiny comes from his earliest years in the Senate, when he strongly opposed mandatory school busing. It was designed to achieve integration and a more equitable education. It was the mid-1970s. What's less known is how he followed the lead of some of the Senate's most fervent segregationists. In a series of never-before-published letters reviewed by CNN, the strength of Biden's opposition to busing comes into sharper focus. On March 25, 1977, Biden wrote, "My bill strikes at the heart of the injustice of court-ordered busing. It prohibits the federal courts from disrupting our educational system." Biden sought and received support from Mississippi Senator James Eastland, the Democratic chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and a leading symbol of Southern resistance to desegregation. He frequently spoke of blacks as, quote, an inferior race. Eastland and others were partners on several of Biden's anti-busing bills. On June 30th, 1977, Biden wrote, "Dear Mr. Chairman, I want you to know that I very much appreciate your help during this week's committee meeting in attempting to bring my anti-busing legislation to a vote." Then in 1978, Biden again asked Eastland to put his anti-busing bill before the full Senate, writing, "Your participation in floor debate would be welcome."
Those are issues that he's obviously going to have to answer for.
You said surprising. Surprising in what way?
Well, the fact that he would solicit the support of staunch segregationists, James Eastland as well as Jesse Helms, introducing legislation as opposing busing at that time.
The new questions stem from taped remarks of Biden during an April campaign appearance in New Hampshire.
I went to law school on a full academic scholarship, the only one in my class to have a full academic scholarship. Went back to law school and, in fact, ended up in the top half of my class. I was the outstanding student in the political science department at the end of my year. I graduated with 3 degrees from undergraduate school and 165 credits, only needed 123 credits.
Biden now concedes he did not graduate in the top half of his law school class, that he does not have 3 degrees from college, and that he was not named outstanding political science student in college.
Newsweek says Biden actually went to school on a half scholarship, ended up near the bottom of his class, and won only 1 degree, not 3.
Joe Biden ranked 76th in a class of 85 at the University of Syracuse Law School. I mean, this guy comes off this whole thing as a flyweight.
Now Biden says Newsweek is right. His memory had failed him.
Democratic presidential candidate Joseph Biden today faces a controversy. 3 weeks ago at a debate at the Iowa State Fair, he used phrases identical to those delivered by British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock.
Biden seemed to be claiming Kinnock's vision and life as his own.
Why is it that my wife, who's sitting out there in the audience, is the first in her family to ever go to college?
Why is Gladys the first woman in her family in 1,000 generations to be able to get the university?
My ancestors who worked in the coal mines in northeast Pennsylvania and come up after 12 hours and play football.
8 hours underground. And then come up and play football.
It's because they didn't have a platform upon which to stand.
There was no platform upon which they could stand.
The notion that every thought or notion or idea you'd have to go back and find and attribute to someone, I think is, quite frankly, ludicrous.
The problem here is that Senator Biden told his audience he'd just been thinking about these things, and he failed to give any credit at all to his famous British speechwriter.
You know, I was thinking on the way over here. Now, that's a little too much, because, as you point out, what's behind the words? What's there? And a lot of people, the rap on Biden has always been that it's just a surface.
I should have said, to paraphrase Neil Kinnock, it's the only time I didn't, and all the times I've ever used it.
But CBS News found a tape of a second instance.
It reappeared in the New York Times with a new charge, that Biden had appropriated a famous litany from the late Robert Kennedy about what the gross national product cannot measure.
It cannot measure the health of our children,
The health of our children,
the quality of our education,
the quality of their education,
the joy of their play,
or the joy of their play.
Biden gave Kennedy no credit. He has also quoted or paraphrased John Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, and British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock, all without credit.
Joseph Biden admitted today that he committed plagiarism when he was in law school. He said it was a mistake, but that it was unintentional.
He quoted 5 pages of someone else's work without proper citation.
I've done some dumb things, and I'll do dumb things again.
He was given an F.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I've been dumb.
To the political community in Washington, it all seems of a piece. Plagiarism at law school, plagiarism on the stump.
The great communicator. Strike that. The great imitator.
You don't steal verbatim, or when you do, as he did 99% of the time, you give credit.
Biden's critics say he sells himself as a man whose words and visions can inspire a new generation in politics. But if the thoughts, phrases, and visions really belong to others, it's a form of false advertising.
Is it a wise idea, though, to take something that personal, anyway, from another politician and try and appropriate it to your own campaign?
I think it was a stupid thing to appropriate material that was really very personal, that was someone else's.
Most people didn't know who he was, you know, Joe Biden, and now they're going to say, oh, yeah, he's the guy who plagiarized. That's
a lot of people.
Politically, that's devastating.
These clips are devastating. He looks like a Joe Biden wind-up doll with somebody else's words coming out.
If they're going to do things that are stupid as well as immoral, then they're probably too dumb to have the job of president.
Voters are going to have to decide whether he was dishonest or dumb.
And I'd be delighted to sit down and compare my IQ to yours if you'd like, Frank.
Joe Biden was victimized by the truth.
Bye Biden. He may not know it yet, but I think this is going to be very difficult for him to recover.
Is Joe Biden dead meat, yes or no?
I think so.
Bob?
It's in terminal condition.
Terminal. Eleanor?
Yes, unless he comes in third in Iowa.
Morton?
Dying.
I say dead.
When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government. And I not only tried it once, I tried it twice, I tried it a third time, and I tried it a fourth time. I'm one of those Democrats who voted for the constitutional amendment to balance the budget. I have introduced on 4 occasions entire plans to balance the budget, knowing I'm not president and I'm not the leader, but for illustrative purposes. I tried with Senator Grassley back in the 80s to freeze all government spending, including Social Security, including everything.
Senator, we have a deficit. We have Social Security and Medicare looming. The number of people on Social Security and Medicare is now 40 million people. It's going to be 80 million in 15 years. Would you consider looking at those programs, age of eligibility,
Absolutely.
cost of living, put it all on the table?
The answer is absolutely, you have to. I mean, it's one of the things that the political advisors say to me is, whoa, don't touch that third. Look, the American people aren't stupid. It's a real simple proposition. We have to do, you and I were talking about Bob Dole earlier. I was one of 5 people, I was the junior guy, in the meeting with Bob Dole, George Mitchell, when we put Social Security in the right path for 60 years. I'll never forget what Bob Dole said. After we reached an agreement about gradually raising the retirement age, et cetera, he said, look, here's the deal. We all put our foot in the boat one at a time. And he stepped like he was stepping into a boat. And we all make the following deal. If any one of the challengers running against incumbent Democrat or Republicans attacks us on this point, we'll all stay together. That's the kind of leadership that is needed.
Ooh.
Social Security is not the hard one to solve. Medicare, that is the gorilla in the room. And you've got to put all of it on the table.
Everything.
Everything. You've got to.
Ooh, that one's gonna hurt him.
In a nutshell, the president's plan doesn't include enough police officers to catch the violent thugs, not enough prosecutors to convict them, not enough judges to sentence them, and not enough prison cells to put them away for a long time. That's why right now, 6 out of every 10 criminals who are arrested on drug charges have their cases dropped. That's why we think the president should triple the commitment that he's made tonight for police, prosecutors, and judges for our cities and our states.
Mr. Chairman, how do we talk about the very serious crime problem in America without mentioning that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world by far, with 22% of our children in poverty and 5 million kids hungry today? Do you think maybe that might have some relationship to crime? How do we talk about crime when this Congress is prepared this year to spend 11 times more for the military than for education? When 21% of our kids drop out of high school, when a recent study told us that twice as many young workers now earn poverty wages as 10 years ago, when the gap between the rich and the poor is growing wider, and when the rate of poverty continues to grow. Do you think maybe that might have some relationship to crime?
So the main thrust of today's show is to show that if Joe Biden ever had a heart, it was in the wrong place. But we'll end on an even more pressing problem, even more pressing than the fact that Biden doesn't think Medicare for All would help solve the coronavirus problem, which is very pressing, is the state of his mental acuity. Here's a counterpunch article by Missy Comley Beatty. Please, Jill Biden, please. I noticed disturbing signs. Then I'd look for positive signs to dispute those disturbing ones. Denial is an exquisite luxury. My husband Charles had an exceptional sense of direction. When we visited New York City and emerged from some subway station, he, unlike me, was oriented to location. I had to look for landmarks. A few years after we'd moved from Nashville to Manhattan, where Charles worked at NYU School of Medicine, he began to ask if we turned right or left when we climbed subway stairs and arrived at street level. And then the notes that were reminders of what he needed to do each day. He'd sit in front of the computer with small pieces of paper on which he'd scribble and later place with his wallet and keys in a bowl near the entrance foyer of our apartment. I'd listen to his conversations with whatever resident he was scheduled to work with the next morning. This was reassuring. He could talk anesthesia enthusiastically and without hesitation. When Charles appeared more tired than usual, I asked if he felt all right. Usually he'd say, "On my feet most of the day." Until the evening he answered, "If you could see inside my head, it's as if I'm smoking weed all the time." "You used to like that feeling," I said, waiting for him to elaborate. "I did when it was a choice." One night I said, "Why don't you retire?" "Where would we go? You love this city, and if I weren't working, we'd have to move." "I love you more than I love any city. We could move back to Baltimore." I'm reminded of Charles' illness, his intensifying confusion, his asking me if he had an appointment to see one of his many physicians, and then asking this again 15 minutes later. I'm reminded each time I see an article about Joe Biden's latest gaffe, or when I watch a video montage of his cognitive lapses. I despise Biden's cruel history, present, and pledges to the future. Among many of his most egregious are corporate servitude, a commitment to for-profit healthcare and big pharma, support for endless wars and regime change, allegiance to Zionism, betrayal of working people and the poor, spearheading incarceration legislation that has devastated black communities, and a cavalier attitude towards a Green New Deal. I take no pleasure, though, in what most certainly is Biden's Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia. It's not funny. It's terrifying. I know. I've lived it. I've lived it with Charles, whose fogginess and cognitive impairment eventually were diagnosed as Parkinsonism. He died before he reached what some Parkinson's sufferers experience, reactive behaviors like anger and aggression. Aggressive behavior is, unfortunately, a common consequence of dementia. One of the few long-term studies, 10 years, found that up to 96% of patients with dementia demonstrated aggressive behavior. When I suggested retirement to Charles, it wasn't that I was worried only about him. I also was concerned for his patients. Delivery of anesthesia is serious as the surgical procedure for which it's needed. Jill Biden is aware of her husband's condition. If Trump is brutalizing Joe Biden now, he will be even more vicious during a campaign, and particularly in a debate. Jill Biden must be merciful in shielding this man she loves as well as protecting the people from him. Again, this is not funny. It's terrifying. Obviously, the point of sharing all this with you is to make sure you understand that Joe Biden's candidacy is not viable. But the most important coffin nail is the fact that the Bernie or Bust crowd, combined with the Bernie or Trump crowd, will absolutely not allow Joe Biden to defeat Donald Trump in the general election. Some will vote third party, some will stay home, some will leave the line for President blank and then vote down ballot, and some will vote directly for Donald Trump, particularly in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. The DNC's willingness to wave its middle finger in the faces of the progressive left and in the faces of working class people and marginalized people is disgusting. Unifying behind Bernie apparently wasn't acceptable to corporate media because their strings are being pulled by the bankers. Bernie is an existential threat to bankers. By choosing Biden, it's clear that the bankers would rather have Donald Trump than Bernie Sanders. At this point, the only solution I can see is that the true left ensures that Trump is elected again and then piles into the streets and makes sure that we will never face this ever again in our future. We need to protest, we need to deny our labor, we need to play hardball with the bankers. We need to play hardball with the media. We need to play hardball with our elected officials. We need to stand in solidarity with everyone who is disenfranchised and marginalized. Enough is enough. We're Bernie or Bust.
Get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Come get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Go get on board the Bernie or Bust train.
The preceding episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.